Hey guys, let's go over some hormone basics and basic function of the endocrine system. Right in this region here, I've got a section of resources over that are specific to how hormones are signal each other or communicate. Uh, First, let's take a look at this hormone receptors and target cells. First of all, here's a big concept you need to understand. Hormones and that whole idea of molecular shapes coming back into play here, because not only do our enzymes have to recognize the shape of molecules so they know what to attach to and cause chemical reactions occur, but also our hormones. Our hormones have a specific shape and they have specific receptors. You can see in this diagram here, hormone A has this round shape, and for the artist, the illustrator who created this, made the receptors that would match to it look like a little half circle because again they're very shape specific. They fit there just like a lock and key or a puzzle piece jigsaw. Whereas hormone B is triangular shaped in this little illustration here. So therefore, you're going to have a target cell for hormone B right here, and this one actually has target has receptors for both hormone A and hormone B. So you need to understand that concept of hormones having to fit into a receptor, because once it fits into that receptor, it'll cause chemical changes to occur within the cell. So in other words, that cell will respond to that hormone signal. So again, up in the reading here, it talks about having target cells. Target cells are wherever the hormone's going, and that target cell is going to have a specific receptor that will match up to it. In class, we talked a little bit about the different methods of signaling. There are three pathways, I guess, hormonal pathways. You get your paracrine signaling, like it mentions here, where hormones act locally. That means within a very short distance, and they actually diffuse out and cross the membrane. All right, whether they interact with a protein on the surface, or whether they actually diffuse into it and then interact with the receptor, that depends on the type of hormone. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But so paracrine again is locally affected cells, so this produces a hormone that travels a very short distance through diffusion and actually binds with a receptor, kind of like they showed up here on the surface, and causes a change. You have autocrine signaling, where it's going to act on the same cell that produced it. So the secreting cell and the target cell are the same, are one and the same. And then finally, endocrine signaling, it has to travel a long distance through the bloodstream, what this pink strip represents. It represents that bloodstream, and the cell is a long ways away, but it too, just like the illustrations up here, it will also have a specific receptor for that hormone to bind to in order to cause a change. A couple of the concepts we need to be aware of, in your body there are hormones and things that can act like agonists, and these are molecules, like it says, that bind to the receptor and induce or cause all the post-receptor events that lead to a biologic effect. We talked about cascades and biochemical pathways before. So agonists will actually bind to the receptor, like it shows up here, and then cause a chain reaction of events that go on inside here that will eventually cause the desired effect. There are also molecules called antagonists, and these molecules actually bind to the receptor site and block the whole process up, kind of like competitive inhibition, like we talked about with enzymes. So again, a lot of these concepts are coming back into play with molecular shape and being shapes and molecules being shape specific, so they can bind to things and cause changes. And hormones are no different. Hormones have to have a receptor and have to fit in just right or work properly. All right. Let's take a look at some of the other things. Here's another illustration of the same type of process. Oops, excuse me, wrong one. Down here, comparing and contrasting signaling methods. Again, just another illustration of the same thing. I like this one because it does show the receptors. You can see the hormone shape is being sent out here in autocrine signaling, and it diffuses out and it intersects or interacts with the receptor on the surface of the cell that also secreted it. All right, so it goes in and causes different changes to occur. Paracrine signaling, again, diffusing across short distances to an adjacent or nearby cell, interacts with receptors. And then, of course, we have endocrine signaling, where the hormones are dumped into the bloodstream through diffusion, and then they travel wherever they're supposed to go, leave the bloodstream, and then, of course, interact with the desired cells, those distant target cells. So again, the big difference is basically, where's the hormone going? Is it going to go to the same cell that produced them? Is it going to go to a local nearby cell without having to travel through the bloodstream, or is it going to have to travel through the bloodstream to get there? And that's how you separate those three forms of of endocrine signaling. Hormone communication. Here's a little video that kind of does a good job of illustrating using an example of ADH, which I'll show you in just a second.
Hormonal communication generally begins with a part of the neuroendocrine system receiving sensory information and reacting by issuing a command to the body in the form of a hormone.
Okay, time out. This is called the hypothalamus right here, this region of the brain, which is connected to this bulb-like gland called the pituitary. If you remember, the pituitary is called the master gland, but they say the hypothalamus sits on the throne. It's not considered the master gland because it is not a gland, it's a part of your brain. The very first gland in most hormonal cascades is the pituitary. Now, not all hormonal reactions occur in this chain of events, but a lot of them do. So again, the pituitary is oftentimes referred to as the master gland, but it receives signals from the hypothalamus to cause it to start acting. So watch this.
In this example, dehydration is detected by osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus, which then directs or stimulates the posterior pituitary gland to release antidiuretic hormone, ADH.
So in this example, we're talking about dehydration. Again, this isn't specific necessarily to food intake, but it does help us understand the general functioning of hormone signaling and communication. Starting with the hypothalamus, you have different receptors. This osmotic concentration, blood pressure, you have baroreceptors or pressure sensors, you have chemoreceptors, which are chemical receptors. So again, you got all kinds of little receptors all throughout your body that can pick up signals, and it's all about helping you maintain homeostasis and proper functioning. Well, if your water levels get too low, these receptors in your hypothalamus called osmoreceptors receive the signal, send a command to the pituitary, and it's going to cause them to release a hormone, a chemical messenger called antidiuretic hormone, or ADH.
Step is to transport the hormone molecules to target cells. This is typically done via the bloodstream. Here, ADH is transported through the bloodstream.
So again, there's that concept of signals or hormones being produced by a gland entering the bloodstream and traveling long distances to its target cell.
To the kidneys and blood vessels. When hormone molecules reach target cells, they will bind to matching receptors on those cells.
Again, there's that concept, the big takeaway. In order for a hormone to exert an action or cause a change, the target tissue has to have the right receptor for it. So I just mentioned how those have to have the right receptors to interact and cause a change.
And the hormone receptor complexes will trigger changes in the target cells. This causes the kidneys to reduce the urine volume output, thereby increasing water retention and countering dehydration. In blood vessels, vasoconstriction is increased, leading to higher blood pressure and thus countering the blood pressure drop caused by dehydration.
Okay, so in this is just an example to show us how hormone signaling communication starts or is carried out. Starts with a gland secreting a hormone, and that hormone has to be dumped into the bloodstream, carried however far away it needs to go to get to its target cell, has to match up with the receptor, and then it will cause the desired change. And again, we're just looking at this to try to give us an idea of how hormones communicate and operate. Now, last thing we're going to look at on this is the different hormone types. And like I said, pay attention to where the receptors are located. Hormones can come in different forms. They can come in the form of polypeptides or proteins. They can come in the form of individual amino acids, or they can be steroid type hormones are basically cholesterol derivatives. In other words, they're made from cholesterol. And if you notice here, the amino acids and the proteins right here both have receptors that are embedded in the cell membrane, because if you remember, amino acids are polar, they have a charge. Therefore, proteins are polar, they have a charge, and anything with a charge cannot cross this non-polar region. Right? It's tightly controlled and regulated, so they got to have the receptors on the surface where they can get to them. Otherwise, they'd never be able to get in. However, steroids, they are non-polar, so they actually don't interact with their receptors until they cross the membrane. So again, depending on the class of protein, it may be a protein or an amino acid that has to bind with the receptor on the cell surface, or it could be a steroid that's going to have to enter and cross over that cell membrane before it actually gets into its receptor and then causes the change. And again, in the next video we're going to talk about what causes those differences, or excuse me, where some of these things go and what happens after they enter the cell. I hope this was helpful. Again, stay in contact with me if you have any questions.